In Conversation with Terry Shepard, award-winning broadcaster, narrator, and author. A deep dive into the writer's craft with the artists and support systems who create the stories we love.
Savannah is a city that knows how to keep a secret, but none as chilling as the one at the heart of Mark Murphy's new novel, Rose Dew. When renowned surgeon Dr. Janie O'Connor vanishes from her historic estate, the genteel calm of coastal Georgia fractures. Her former fiancé, Philip Carruthers, heir to one of Savannah's most powerful families, stands accused, yet insists he's innocent. And Detective Frank Winger, burdened by personal ties to the case, must navigate false witnesses, buried grudges, and the shadows beneath the city's live oaks to uncover the truth. Mark Murphy is a Savannah native, a physician and a storyteller whose eclectic life journey from marine biology to medicine has shaped a writer with a keen eye for human complexity. Rose Dew is his third novel and perhaps his most haunting, weaving Southern Gothic with a taut mystery that asks how well we really know the people we trust. Dr. Mark Murphy, it's great to have you with us. Thanks for joining the conversation.
Great to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
How did a marine biologist end up in medicine?
That's a funny question. My mother was an English teacher. My dad's a surgeon. And I grew up on the water, so I've always loved the ocean. And it's funny, I sort of wrestled with this right brain, left brain dichotomy my whole life. I've always enjoyed reading and writing. I've always enjoyed things like history. I've also always enjoyed science. And so I thought about being an English teacher or an attorney. I thought about being a marine biologist or a gastroenterologist. And my high school English teacher actually told me a long time ago, she said, basically, you need to go to the sciences because if you can always write. But if you go into the literature area as a career, they'll never let you back into the science realm. So I said, okay, that narrowed my choices. And so the classwork for marine biology and medicine are about the same. So basically, I took all the required classes for both. I worked as a marine biologist and spent about 6 months at sea and realized I was not going to do that for a living. I was not Jacques Cousteau. I did not have independent wealth like Jacques Cousteau did. And frankly, it's not as romantic as it seems when you're out on the ocean for weeks at a time. And so I was dragged, not screaming, but somewhat reluctantly back into medicine, which is my father's profession. It's funny. I never thought it would be the right profession for me originally, but I thought it was just too lazy to do what my dad did. But it has been the right profession. It actually was ultimately the right choice. Was that John Lennon said that life is what happens when you're busy planning other things. So I tried to plan other things, and I ended up doing this anyway. And I love it. I really do enjoy my work. So that's how, in a nutshell.
How did you stay in love with writing through all of this?
That wasn't hard. I think that people who enjoy writing, love writing, it's like breathing, right? You have to do it. And I've been a writer my whole life. I learned to read pretty early. My parents read to me a lot, and I learned to sight read early on. I was reading voraciously by the time I was in first and second grade. I read a school newspaper that I just mimeographed. It was on mimeograph machines. I mimeographed it and put it out. Purple mimeographed it, put it out for my classmates in fourth grade. Produced a play in fifth grade that we put on for the PTA. I won a poetry contest in sixth grade and just took off from there. Was editor of my high school paper. All the things that writers feel compelled to do. And it's a compulsion. It's something that I look forward to doing every weekend when I'm off. If I can make time for my writing, I do that, and I really enjoy doing it. It's not that part of the dichotomy is not hard to live out. I really enjoy both things.
Rose Dew blends Southern Gothic elements with a modern detective story. How did you balance mood, suspense, and realism?
That's a good question. First off, Savannah lends itself to the mood aspect. It's been called America's most haunted city. There are ghosts at every turn. In fact, my own father-in-law allegedly haunts a pub that he used to own. We found that out on a ghost tour. It was unexpected. I said, hey, your dad haunts a sixpence pub. Who knows? We couldn't conjure him up, unfortunately. We tried. My mother-in-law was actually mad that he didn't haunt their home. She said, why is he at the pub? Why would he not be at the house? I said, I don't think there's really a ghost. But again, even people in your family can be ghosts in this town. And so that part was pretty easy to do. Flannery O'Connor, who's a Savannah native, set the bar for Southern Gothic literature. Her characters, the good man's hard to find. Who could forget the misfit? That kind of characterization is something that anybody who reads Southern literature is familiar with. And so just blending all that into the story wasn't very hard. It just came naturally, honestly. It wasn't much of an effort.
And Philip Carruthers, the prime suspect, is also a very sympathetic figure at times.
Yes.
What drew you to write such an ambiguous character?
I think we're all ambiguous, right? Everybody, good characters are not all good and all evil. What's the most compelling part about Star Wars, right? It's the fact that the son of Darth Vader, who finds out that this evil man who's been his nemesis is his father, ultimately ends up being that man's redemption. And I think that we're all multifaceted, complex creatures. That's what makes characters interesting. And from my perspective, having Philip have some redemptive qualities and some aspects that may not be such a bad thing. There actually are this book was originally 150,000 words. There's a lot. Yeah, it was ponderous. And not quite War and Peace, but pretty dang bad. But not bad in the sense that it was not a good read, but a lot of extra detail. In that extra detail, which is all in here, it's all still there. So there are long pieces where you actually understand Philip better, that you understand his relationship with his father, with his sister, with his mother, and you have even more sympathy for him because there are some aspects to his youth that were tortured. And like we all have those skeletons in our proverbial closets. Philip has his own. But I think that kind of character with both good and bad elements is what makes for interesting reading.
As does Detective Frank Winger. How did his past shape the way he approaches this case?
Ethan Kanan, who is a fellow physician author, once said that the doctors are like good writers because they're like soldiers. They see people who, at the extremes of their lives, right, who've seen great and terrible things. I think is the exact quote. Philip has grown up well ensconced lifestyle, been protected. Frank, on the other hand, is a war veteran. He's served in Afghanistan. He's seen a lot of death. He's seen a lot of heartache. There's some tragedies that occurred in his own life. And so I think those things shaped who he ultimately is. The ghosts of his past, not the ghosts of Savannah, but the ghosts in his head, haunting him throughout his entire life. And they helped to give his character complexity as well.
The book is Rose Dew. It's written by our special guest, Dr. Mark Murphy. His website is mark-e-murphy.com. Janie O'Connor is missing, yet she feels present throughout the story. How did you craft her as a character that readers feel they know without actually meeting her?
If that was the hardest part of this, and originally that gargantuan 150,000 word tome that this novel originally was, there are almost two parallel stories. There was a Janie section, and there was a section that involved Frank. And early on, one of my friends, who's also an editor, said, "You got to pick a protagonist here. You can't have them both." And so ultimately it became Frank's book. It was Frank's book. But Janie is very much a character who's well-defined because we use flashbacks. We use other people's recollections of her. We use other people's impressions of her. And you do get a real sense of her as a person, what kind of person she is. I think all character drives action, the old saying in this. And so you have to understand her character to understand why she did what she did and why she does, how she lives her life and everything else. And I think that's her three-dimensionality came by virtue of looking at her through the different facets of a crystal and other people's interpretation of the way she was. But you do get to see glimpses of that. Again, there's a ton of backstory that I've got written down on a piece of paper that didn't make the final cut.
Several of your characters seem to blur the line between truth and deception. What do you think makes people lie?
Great question. I think it depends on one's motivation. Desperation, in some cases. People who are desperate will lie to get out of a jam. We've all done that when we've been pulled over at times. I remember that I was pulled over once by a state trooper who was wearing a Clemson lapel pin. And Clemson had played football against Florida State the night before. And all I said was, I didn't actually lie, but I said, "How about those Tigers last night? They almost pulled it off, didn't they?" He said, "They dang sure did." He gave me a warning. Wasn't exactly a lie, but I just made him feel like I was one of his tribe. I'm actually a Georgia graduate, and I'm actually in Athens right now, getting ready to go to a football game against Texas tomorrow. But I didn't have any Georgia gear on that day. So that kind of deception can be a mild deception. People also lie. Some people lie because they can't help themselves. I think most politicians are lying when they're moving their lips. That's my personal opinion. If they're talking, they're usually lying. So people will lie to gain things, or people lie to make people do what they want them to do. It's an unfortunate aspect of things. I'm a terrible liar, by the way. I can pull off the Clemson cop thing, but if I actually lie to somebody's face, I'm a terrible poker player. I'm blinking and I'm looking around, and my tells, I'd be awful playing poker, which is why I don't play anymore. But I think people have different motivations. Some are better at it than others. I think all people know what kind of things will motivate somebody in different parts of their lives.
So much of your work as a physician is interpreting the signs that you see from your patients, including what they tell you. How does that flow into the storytelling in Rose Dew?
So that's great. That's a great question. And I'll say that two things. Number one, that being a doctor and being a writer are symbiotic in terms of what sorts of skills are necessary to be able to relate what you're seeing. You have to be observant. You have to be able to look at details. I can look at someone, I can tell I saw somebody on TV once, I said that person has a goiter, for example, and they ultimately ended up being diagnosed with one. But you can see little tremors they may have, little tiny details that will help you make a diagnosis. In medicine, will help add depth or perception to what's going on with a character when you're writing. I think all those things play a role. I think being able to notice little details is important to being able to tell a story. Those little details can actually help you to delineate what is relevant and what's not relevant. Sometimes you can throw somebody a fake out. There's one character in the story, for example, that a fellow physician read the story, and I was setting up that character to be diabetic. And there's a point where he has a diabetic episode happen, and she picked up on that. But I wrote that section out of the book. But she said, "Why do you set the guy to be diabetic and you didn't play it out?" I said, "Well, you're the only one who's ever noticed that." But that sort of thing happens with physicians. I think that we all have those things we look at as a doctor, as a writer, and the two skill sets really tend to meld pretty well when you're writing a book.
The book is Rose Dew, spelled Rosedhu. It's by our special guest, Dr. Mark Murphy. Mark-e-murphy.com is his website. What was the hardest scene to write in that story?
There's a sexual assault scene, and that was the hardest scene to write. It's one of those things where I've dealt with patients who are victims of sexual assault. It's horrific. It's brutal. And frankly, it's hard to imagine that if you've not been through it, and I haven't. So you have to put yourself in the skin of that character and try to imagine their horror at the situation and what they would be feeling both emotionally and physically. That was difficult for me. And I was nauseous when I finished writing the scene. It was actually, at one point, was even more graphic. And somebody read it and said, "You've got to tone this down. This is horrible." And it was. It's still horrible, but it's one of those things I think it's central to the book, so it had to be in the story. But that was very difficult to write.
And Savannah is front and center as one of the characters, one of the most important characters in this book.
Yes.
Were there real locations or legends from history that inspired the estate or the story itself?
So I live on Rose Dew Road. Okay. So there was a Rose Dew plantation. It actually was owned by Sir Patrick Houston, who was the first colonial governor of Georgia, and his estate, which burned down, the actual estate house burned down in 1879. So that part is fictional. There's no estate house that the character restored. That house didn't ever exist in real life. But the location is real. The verdant nature of the surroundings, the maritime forest that surrounds the area, that's real. I live in the middle of it. And so there are very real locations there, just not the actual house. And there's no stone gate, and that stuff was a little bit of embellishment on my part to make it for a dramatic effect. That Rose Dew is a real place. The name means beautiful view in Gaelic, and that's why it's spelled the way it is. It's not D-E-W, it's D-H-U. And Patrick Houston was a Scottish baronet. And interestingly, the original house that burned down, when George Washington came for his tour of the colonies after he was president, he came to Savannah. He visited Rose Dew Plantation House. So there you go. George Washington, I don't think he slept there, but he did visit there, came by. So that's the legend anyway.
This is your third book. How has your writing process evolved over all 3 volumes?
I started what I really been writing mostly over the last 20 years has been columns for the newspaper. I write for the Savannah paper pretty regularly. I've written magazine articles and a few textbook chapters in between. That's more for work. My academic side, I still do literatures and things like that. I actually did a chapter in a textbook about dying, and it was edited by the Pope's personal physician. And I wrote a Christian viewpoint of palliative care, and he was the editor. I asked him, I said, "Wait a minute, why am I writing a Christian viewpoint of palliative care when the Pope's personal physician is the editor? Why don't you write this?" He said, because I'm the editor, I can tell you to do it. Okay, thank you. But the bottom line is my writing process has evolved from the novels. The long fiction is the most challenging thing for me. That's the hardest thing for me to write. It's easy for me to do articles for the paper. It's easy for me to write short stories because I can finish them in a weekend, right? I can write them over maybe 2 weekends. Long fiction, writing a novel is like giving birth to an elephant. It's very difficult and it's arduous and I can't emphasize the giving birth. I've never given birth, but I've delivered babies. I haven't actually given birth, but I've given birth to 3 books. And in the context of doing that, I've learned that I've gotten better, I've gotten more efficient in terms of my writing. I write in the mornings on Saturday and Sunday. I stop writing because my wife gets up and we start doing things during the day. But the bottom line is I've gotten more organized. My first attempted book, it was Stillborn. That attempted Stillborn book was this meander. I just thought I would go where the muse takes me. And the muse took me all over the place. And it ended up being this rambling, directionless discourse on something. I don't know what, but it discarded it. But so the next one, I realized I needed to know where I was going. And I wrote an outline that allowed me to get there. And then I tried to stick to the outline. And I do it off on tangents every once in a while. But the bottom line is that's the way I write these things now. And I know where I'm going. I kind of do an outline of the plot to make sure it's tight. And then I try to stick to that as best I can.
How many revisions did it take to get Rose Dew where you wanted it?
4 completely revised versions. I rewrote the book 4 times. This has been about 3.5 years. I wrote one, that long meandering giant version, and then I made it Frank's story, and then I cut it down again, and this is the 4th iteration, the most recent one, and the best one, obviously. I would hope it would be the best. If one of the other ones was the best, then I'm SOL. But no, whoops. There goes that one. It was the better one. No, but the bottom line is this is the fourth iteration of this, and it's a complete right through. The Memoirs of a Geisha took 10 years and like 15 revisions. So I kept thinking about that. Well, I haven't gotten to that point yet. It's only been 3 years. It hasn't been 10. We didn't break that record.
What's been the early reaction from readers to the story?
Favorable, very favorable. Now I'll give you one caveat. Most of the early readers are relatives of mine or friends, but the 2 best reactions I've had from people who are the quasi-independent of me, they know me, but they wouldn't have any problem telling me if something was bad, was a colorectal surgeon, the one who picked up on the diabetic thing. She's a colorectal surgeon, but she also edited a literary magazine in a prior life. And before she decided to go into medicine, and she loved the book, and she hates everything. She's like Mikey on those old Life commercials. She really hates everything. She reads everything. She posts her reviews on Facebook and on Instagram. And they're usually video reviews. And that one person said, I usually read reviews to find out what not to read. But she really loved the book. She really enjoyed it. I was prepared for the worst. I said, look, just don't eviscerate me too badly if you hate it. And she promised that she would keep her evisceration to herself if she hated it. But she loved it enough to post it right away and really enjoyed it. That was the first good one. And the second one was actually my nurse, who tells me that she's not a reader. She doesn't read. She said, I haven't read a book in 10 years, but I figured I would read this because, it's coming out, and I figured I'd give you some feedback. I don't want to get her in trouble, but she was at one of our satellite offices. She started reading it like in the morning when she was drinking her morning coffee. And she said she finished the whole thing at work. She read it during the day. And I was off that day. So it's a good thing I was off because I would have wondered what the heck was going on. And she loved it. She thought it was great. And she said, I don't read it. I haven't read a book in 10 years. So those 2, I think, were the 2 best endorsements I got so far. She loved it. And actually, the surgeon loved it too. So good endorsements so far. I'm pretty happy with them. Oh, one more. Ron Rash, who is a well-known author who wrote Serena and several other books. And he is a professor of creative writing at Western Carolina University. Ron read it, and because I sponsored it at the Savannah Book Festival a few years ago, and Ron really enjoyed it so much that he texted his sister, who lives in Richmond Hill, Georgia, near me, and his sister texted me and said, Ron really liked your book, because he texted me about it right when he finished it. He never does that. So there you go. Now, those are the 3 best, I think, that I've gotten so far.
Do you think you have more stories to tell for Detective Frank Winger?
Frank is an interesting character, and I think Frank has a lot of stories that could potentially be told about him. Yeah, absolutely. I like Frank enough as a character that I want to keep him alive, and I want to keep him doing things. It's funny, and I wrote a book 12 years ago on The Shadow Man about a serial killer, and in that book, there's a certain character that dies. And the most people really like this. My wife was mad at me because I killed that character off. She actually said, I can't believe you killed her off. She had to die because the guy would have been caught. If she stayed alive, he would have been caught. She's, I don't care. That's your artistic license. Doesn't mean you can kill off one of my favorite characters. I'm sorry. So Frank, on the other hand, I think is sympathetic enough that there people want him alive, and he has a reason to be alive because he can be the epicenter of several other stories. So yes, I think Frank's got more stories left in him.
What do you hope people will take away from their encounter with Rose Dew?
I think they would. I'd like them to. First off, I've always said that a good mystery novel like this, good detective novel, is like a bag of Lay's potato chips. You can't eat just one. We just keep going. I want people to find it an enjoyable thrill ride, that they have a good time doing it. It's designed to be written, to be read on a weekend vacation or something where you just knock it out. So I want people to enjoy it. That's number one. I want people to really have a good time with the book. Second, I'd like them to really get a sense for what Savannah's. I love my hometown. I grew up here. My dad practiced surgery in this town for 38 years. I've been practicing gastroenterology for 32. My wife is from Savannah. We met in 8th grade, and we've been together ever since. Not married ever since. You can't even do that in Georgia, but we've been together a long time, and I love the city. I've got deep roots here, and I want people to see Savannah through the way that I see it, as a beautiful, enchanting, haunting town that has a lot of stories to tell in and of itself. It's an old city filled with ghosts, but filled with a lot of great stories too. It's not just the Savannah Bananas. So,
what question haven't I asked you that you wish that I had?
That's a good question. That's a great question. Probably the most interesting aspect of any writer's background is what motivates them to write. Why do you write? And you asked me this before and how I became a writer, but I think the bigger overarching question here is, what motivates you to write something like this? Okay. And that, I think, is something that people might find interesting. When I was a kid, I used to love to read when I was very small, these Encyclopedia Brown mysteries. Encyclopedia Brown was a kid, you're familiar with, I can tell by your expression. Encyclopedia Brown was a kid that is in the neighborhood. He was a smart kid, and he could figure out what was going on in the neighborhood from these little clues. It was like Sherlock Holmes in a 12-year-old's body. I love that kind of thing. Over the course of my life, I've always enjoyed stories where you can't exactly figure out what's going on. You don't know what's going to happen, where you think you've figured out and you're down a blind alley somewhere and you're up against the wall. Wait a minute, how did I get here? So that's what I enjoy doing in my writing. Shadow Man was like that. The Curse of Thrax was like that. This is like that. This is one of those stories where what motivates me is, okay, fool people. Can I make them think something is going one way and it's going another? Can I hide the actual bad guy or bad girl or whatever from the reader long enough to make them not be able to guess? Because when I'm watching a movie on TV, I usually know who the killer is within 15 minutes. Yeah. I'll tell my wife, this guy is going to do this to that guy. And they do it. She goes, how did you know that? I said, I'm a writer. I know this that kind of straightforward writing bores me. Okay. I hate things that are predictable. I like writing things that throw people a curveball. So I think that's the question I would ask me is, why write this kind of story? Because I like reading it. Ultimately, I like reading this kind of story.
The book is Rose Dew. It's a fantastic story written by our guest, Mark Murphy. His website is mark-e-murphy.com. Mark, this has been great. Thanks very much for the conversation.
And thank you very much for having me. It's been great as well for me.
In Conversation with Terry Shepard is a copyrighted presentation. All rights reserved. I'm Lisa Davis. Join Terry Shepard next time in Conversation.